everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're embarking on an incredible journey. We're going to trace over 2 millennia of turbulent, tragic, and honestly, utterly fascinating history to truly understand the foundation of modern Germany. Let's jump right in.
So, here's the big question we're tackling today. How in the world did a fragmented patchwork of hundreds of tiny states, kingdoms, and principalities manage to transform into the absolute economic powerhouse of Europe? That's the hook of our story. You see, the history of Germany isn't just some simple straight-line tale of an ancient nation-state. No, it's a relentless, centuries-long tug of war between profound fragmentation on one side and fierce consolidation on the other. To make sense of all this, we've broken this massive history down into 6 distinct eras for our roadmap. We'll start with the Holy Roman Empire, then move to forging the German Empire, the World Wars and Division, the day the Berlin Wall falls, the economics of reunification, and finally, we'll wrap up with modern Germany today. All right, part 1, the Holy Roman Empire and its medieval roots. We're taking it all the way back to the ancient origins of the region. We're going to rapidly compress over 1,000 years of early history right here. Now, the concept of Germania was actually noted by Julius Caesar to describe the unconquered lands east of the Rhine River. In 9 AD, Germanic tribes fiercely resisted the Romans at the Teutoburg Forest, which successfully prevented them from being annexed. Fast forward a few centuries, and the Frankish king Charlemagne united a massive chunk of the region, getting himself crowned emperor in 800 AD. By 962 AD, under Otto I, this whole setup evolved into the Holy Roman Empire. And amazingly, this polity miraculously survived for a full millennium, right up until it was dissolved during the Napoleonic Wars in 1806. Now, it's really important to understand that early Germany was absolutely nothing like the centralized states of France or Britain. It was defined by this concept called Kleinstaaterei. It basically means a highly decentralized, balkanized political structure. Think of it like a giant, complicated jigsaw puzzle made up of several hundred small, German-speaking principalities. The emperor was really just a confederal figure. He didn't have absolute centralized power. So these local states functioned with a huge degree of autonomy. It was this fragmented web of territories that were just barely held together. Moving into part 2, forging the German Empire and Bismarck's strategy. Following the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century, all those old feudal systems started to fall away, and a new, growing sentiment of nationalism began to really take root. And this brings us to the absolute mastermind of German unification, Prussian statesman Otto von Bismarck. But Bismarck didn't unify Germany by sitting around a table and signing peaceful diplomatic agreements. No, he did it through an incredibly calculated, masterful series of short, decisive wars. Step 1. Defeat Denmark in 1864 to seize a couple of key territories. Step 2 involved defeating Austria in 1866, which effectively sidelined the rival Austrian Empire from German affairs completely. And finally, Step 3 was provoking and defeating France in the Franco-Prussian War from 1870 to 1871. That victory is what finally persuaded the southern German states to fall in line behind Prussian leadership. So, on January 18, 1871, the German Empire was officially proclaimed. And get this, they did it right in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. This unified the ethnic German states, excluding Austria, of course, into one single entity. And the results? They were staggering. Within just a few decades, this brand new empire became an absolute technological and industrial powerhouse. They built Europe's most extensive rail network, the world's strongest army, and their success in the natural sciences was so off the charts that 1/3 of all Nobel Prizes went to German inventors and researchers. Just incredible. Part 3, World Wars and Division. These are the darkest chapters of the story. We have to pivot to the 20th century, where Germany's aggressive expansionism tore the entire European continent and ultimately itself apart. Following the devastation of the First World War and the highly unstable Weimar Republic, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party established a brutal totalitarian regime in 1933. Their aggressive territorial demands directly triggered the Second World War. During this incredibly dark time, the Nazis orchestrated the Holocaust, a horrific, systematic genocide program that murdered 11 million people, including 6 million Jews. By May 1945, Nazi Germany was totally, utterly defeated. The nation's actual physical territory was shrunk down, millions of Germans were expelled from the east, and the country was completely occupied by the victorious Allied powers. And that post-war division quickly hardened into a global ideological standoff. As the Cold War set in, two entirely different, deeply opposed realities were forced upon the German people. Over in the West, you had the Federal Republic of Germany, which evolved into a parliamentary democracy, a booming capitalist economy, and a key member of NATO. But in the East, the German Democratic Republic emerged as a totalitarian dictatorship. They had essentially planned economy and operated strictly as a Soviet satellite state. You can literally feel the tension when you look at this. Heavily armed tanks facing off directly at a checkpoint in divided Berlin. It perfectly captures the intense, razor-edge military friction of the era. Germany was quite literally the absolute front line of the Cold War, trapped right between two nuclear-armed superpowers. But we really have to zoom in from that macro geopolitical scale to the micro-human tragedy. In 1961, the East German regime constructed the Berlin Wall, quite simply, to physically stop its own citizens from fleeing to the West. For nearly 4 decades, families were literally torn apart. And tragically, attempting to cross this deadly barrier cost many innocent people their lives. Which brings us to part 4, the Berlin Wall falls and the peaceful revolution of 1989. By the 1980s, the East German economy was completely stagnating, and 1989 erupted into a year of massive, peaceful protests, with citizens demanding freedom and reform. In the actual way the wall finally fell, it is honestly one of history's greatest ironies. On November 9, 1989, an East German official named Günter Schabowski held a press conference to talk about some new travel regulations. But he totally botched the announcement. He mistakenly stated that the borders were open immediately. That one misspoken phrase sent tens of thousands of East Berliners flooding to the checkpoints. The border guards were completely overwhelmed, and without orders, they simply opened the gates. Euphoric crowds instantly began tearing apart the defining physical structure of the Cold War, piece by piece.
Part 5. The Economics of Reunification. This was a sobering reality check. The pure joy and euphoria of 1989 very quickly collided with the massive, incredibly difficult challenge of merging two vastly different economic systems.
Back in 1990, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl famously promised East Germans that they would soon see blossoming landscapes. But as our sources point out, this was largely an illusion, one that would fuel a lot of disillusionment later on. The political rhetoric sounded great, but it was wildly disconnected from the severe economic shockwave that was about to slam into the East. 66%. Think about that number for a second. That is East Germany's GDP per capita compared to the West in the year 2023, literally more than 3 decades after reunification. So why is there still such a persistent gap? Well, one massive policy shortcut they took was converting East German marks to West German Deutschmarks at a 1-to-1 exchange rate. Since Eastern productivity was really only about a third of the West's, this currency conversion artificially skyrocketed labor costs and absolutely crippled Eastern industrial competitiveness overnight. The long-term structural fallout of all this is pretty staggering. By 2020, nearly 90% of major German corporate headquarters were located in the West, with under 10% in the East. Right after reunification, an agency stepped in and essentially privatized, liquidated, or restructured nearly 12,000 state-owned enterprises in the East to force a rapid transition to a market economy. But what this actually did was strip the East of its industrial leadership capacities, leaving it highly dependent on financial transfers from the West, even to this day. And finally, Part 6, Modern Germany Today. Let's take a look at how this newly restitched nation actually operates on the global stage as a leader today. Just look at the unified borders of modern Germany, sitting right there in the very center of Europe. What was once a balkanized region made up of hundreds of tiny, fragmented states is now a massive, singular democratic force. Modern Germany shoulders some huge geopolitical responsibilities. It's a true economic powerhouse, contributing roughly a quarter of the entire Eurozone's GDP. It helped found the Eurozone itself back in the late 90s. It took a massive leading role during the 2015 European migrant crisis by being a main receiver of asylum seekers. And most recently, it made the historic decision to heavily strengthen its armed forces following Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. It has successfully reinvented itself into a stabilizing democratic leader. But of course, it's not immune to modern global crises. Despite its immense wealth and world-class infrastructure, Germany still grapples with some severe domestic challenges. For example, our sources note that between mid-2021 and early 2023, Dealing with vaccine shortages and a highly transmissible COVID-19 Deltacron variant led to over 180,000 excess deaths, along with some pretty significant economic uncertainty. Wealth and power, it turns out, don't just grant you a magic shield against modern hardships.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Can the deep social and psychological divides of the past ever truly catch up to the administrative unification on paper? Because the truth is, those economic disparities between East and West continue to fuel political polarization today. You can see it clearly in the higher support for populist parties like the AfD in eastern states. And on top of that, research shows that regions once heavily surveilled by the East German Stasi's secret police still exhibit lower trust and lower civic engagement 3 decades later. The scars of history, they run incredibly deep. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the complex, fascinating foundation of modern Germany. See you next time.